What's up, everybody? Welcome back. This is Unrestricted, episode 2. Coming back from last night's UFC 290. I was at a wedding, so I didn't really get to catch all of the card, but I did get to see Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez, which is a featherweight championship, 145 pounds. First insight I kind of had is obviously Volk's dominance, him solidifying the fact that he's the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world. He had high takedown rate in the first 2-3 rounds and just kind of asserted dominance from the beginning until his technical knockout. And it was just masterful to watch. I think listening to him talk in interviews leading up to fights and then him post-fight interviews and how much preparation he puts into each fight camp and then how much respect he has for each individual fighter, I think is a really interesting thing. Like you could see him, he went up to Yair Rodriguez after and you could like kind of hear him through the mic. And he was saying how much he prepared for him and how much he respected him, even though he's not the most decorated fighter he's ever fought against when it comes to a championship belt contention fight and whatnot. So I had a lot of fun watching it. I think just anyone who admires greatness can appreciate that. So, Kyle, you got any more insight on that?
Yeah, so I definitely watch UFC from a very casual lens. I watch most of the cards. But I don't really know too much about the game, too much of the technical aspects of it. Watch very much from an entertainment standpoint. Watched a few of the fights last night. Really loved that Volkanovski fight. I thought it was really entertaining. Volk, obviously one of the biggest names in the sport, one of the fan favorites, and one of my personal favorite fighters, 100%. And seeing him in the third round, obviously, like you mentioned, the takedowns in the first two, I believe he had 6 in the first 2 rounds, which was impressive. He's definitely in control. But seeing him flip that switch in the third round, that's just a dominant athlete right there, and that was really cool to see. I thought he was really dominant, and I'm looking forward to seeing more fights from him in the future.
Yeah, interesting thing about Volk, not a ton of people know that kind of just watch from like a glance standpoint, but so he used to be a rugby player growing up, and of course he's only 5'6", right? And he fights at 145 and then moved up to 155. But at one point he was, I believe, 200, definitely above 200 pounds, but I think closer to 215, 220 when he was a rugby player. So he was 5'6", 220. Dude. So think about that natural frame. So you basically take the strength of someone who's 220 pounds naturally, and then you minimize that down to a smaller cutted weight. There's not a lot of dudes who can contend against that. I mean, he's just a bigger body dude, bigger bone structured dude fighting against guys who are probably 170 pounds walking around. It's just kind of an insane anomaly. Just the fact that he can even cut down to that weight and fight it that weight. It's just kind of crazy. So,
sure.
Yeah. All right. So next we're going to kind of give our breakdown into Portland Trail Blazers and updates since last week's episode and everything that's developing from that standpoint. So Kyle, if you want to give an intro to everything that's happened since then and get us started.
Yeah. So since last week, a few things have happened with the Blazers. They signed Matisse Thybulle to an extension, 3 years, with the last year being a player option for $11 million a year, coming out to $33 million total. The first Summer League game has also taken place. Obviously, Scoot Henderson gets injured. Very difficult to see. But besides that, it was some vintage Blazers basketball, absolutely choking in the final moments of the game. Just nobody on the same page. Shaden Sharp had a great game. He's obviously too experienced and too skilled to really be out there, but I love to see him play. As if he's going to keep playing in the Summer League, I love to watch the show. His development seems to be coming along great. Ryan Rupert did not have a good game. He looked very lost out there. I still believe in the upside 100%. Chris Murray, everybody loves to talk about how he's a 22-year-old, 23-year-old rookie. He's a very low mistakes guy. Made a mistake on the final play of the game and cost us our first Summer League game. So that's a good kind of moment. Obviously, rookies are not prone to mistakes, even if they're older rookies. They're gonna learn. So, classic Blazers in first Summer League game, and of course, in similar fashion to Shaden Sharp last year, Scoot gets injured. Probably is going to sit out the rest of Summer League, which is a decision that I'm fine with. I mean, it's Summer League. You want to be cautious with your franchise player at this point. But that's really unfortunate. I was really looking forward to seeing Scoot play this summer, and he looked great in his minutes of action. So that sucks, but looking forward to seeing Scoot and Shaden this year. I think it's going to be a very electric duo. As for the Dame stuff, we thought there was a chance that he was traded this week. We talked about that a little bit on our last episode. He does not get traded this week. It seems from reports at least that the Blazers and the Heat are at a little bit of a stalemate. The Blazers don't like the Heat's offer enough. As of now, the Heat don't really have much to offer. Dame and his agent are very outspoken that Dame only wants to go to Miami. So we're at a bit of a crossroads here. I think what needs to happen with this is that Miami needs to be the team who finds a partner for Hero, and they need to get a first and a young player, or maybe even 2 firsts back for Hero. And if this isn't good enough for the Blazers, they need to potentially look to flip Caleb Martin for a first as well. I don't know if the Heat want to do that. I think they should. I think it's worth having a big 3 of Jimmy, Bam, and Dame. And it seems like the Blazers are going to be kind of prolonging this and playing hardball with the Heat, which they should, I think. Obviously, in terms of leverage, everybody knows that we're going to send Damian Lillard where he wants to go, and where he wants to go is only Miami. So you could say we don't have leverage there, but we don't have to trade Dame. He's on a very long, I think he's 4 years left on his contract. So in terms of actual leverage like that, we have the ability to hold out on this one and play hardball, and that's what a good negotiator does. And I hope that Cronin can kind of manage this well, and I hope he gets as much value out of Dame as he can, because that's what you need to do at this point. What are your thoughts on recent Blazer stuff, trying either Thibel's contract or the Dame situation or Summer League?
As far as the leverage part, I mean, obviously Dame doesn't have any leverage.
He doesn't.
The main leverage comes from respect and the message you'd be giving to the fan base, which we talked about last week and very clearly stated. But I also don't buy all the comments from Dame's agent about how you'd be getting an unhappy superstar and he potentially wouldn't be playing for you and would potentially sit out games. That goes contrary to anything I've ever heard Dame say and represent. I just don't really think that's going to actually take place. I think that's just more so a threat and words to try to get what they want from their camp. But there hasn't been a ton of real information that's come out or real updates. It's just kind of been reports and little stuff that we can't really verify whether it's actually true or not.
Right.
So we're in kind of a weird spot, but ultimately I do think he'll end up in Miami. I don't see a ton of scenarios where he doesn't. And I think there's a lot of options with a third team or potentially even fourth team to make that deal happen. I just saw some speculation about the Hawks potentially getting in there, and obviously Brooklyn and those teams fulfilling that additional team entering into the deal. We're just going to have to wait and see. It's obviously a weird spot to be in as a fan and not the most entertaining, because we're just waiting to have kind of ties cut off from our franchise player and favorite player of all time. And so it's just a bad situation to be in general. It's definitely not fun. But once that does happen and we can just have clarity and be done with it, I'm really looking forward to that. I almost just want it to happen, not have to worry about it anymore and just move forward. Be a fan of wherever Dame goes, and then pay attention to our rebuilding in Portland and be able to have the best of both worlds, and then just enjoy the league in general. So yeah, that's kind of like my main thoughts about it. Do you have anything else, Kyle, or do you want to move on to the rest of the league?
I did want to talk about Matisse Thybulle's contract. I didn't touch too much on it.
Cool, yeah.
Obviously 3 years, $33 million. We both kind of think that that's right around where he would get paid on the open market. I think that's around where a player like Matisse Thybulle is valued, especially with the new CBA. I feel like, I don't know how the numbers exactly break out, but I feel like the 11 million is the new like 8-9 million, right? That kind of makes sense. And I think Matisse Thybulle is a worthy player of a contract like that. Why I don't love this contract is because we're signing him to this deal to play him, I think. And I don't really understand that. If you look at kind of our roster right now, Shaedon Sharpe, Anthony Simons, and Scoot Henderson should be playing all of the minutes at the 1 and 2, in my opinion. They should be playing every single minute at the guard positions. So at the 3, which I guess is where Thybulle would slot in, we have Nasir Little, we have Ryan Rupert. We are assuming, I think probably we're getting Jaime Jaquez back in this deal with the Heat.
We can't
until 30 days. But I at this point, I don't think he's going to be traded in the next 30 days, to be honest.
Really?
I think
he's going to be traded within the next 2 weeks. I don't think he's going to. I don't think Miami's going to dish him.
Maybe. I don't
And I
know.
also don't think Portland wants him bad enough to hold out for him.
Maybe.
I just don't see them. Did they even give him a workout?
The Blazers, they didn't work out anybody in that range. I
Yeah,
don't
that's
know
what I'm
why.
saying. It's just kind of weird. Like I feel like they could have made a deal and it ended up with him in a different way. I don't know. I just don't see them being as viewing him as highly as Miami does. But I could be wrong. I don't know what's happening in their office. But
That's fair. That's fair.
yeah,
I kind of think I think it's somewhat strong that we're getting Jaime Jaquez back, who is a 3. And so that gives us 3 young players at the small forward position along with those 3 guards. And we're rebuilding. We both said we want to be bad next year. I'd honestly just rather like throw Ryan Rupert out to the dogs and let him get reps than play Matisse Thybulle, who we know what he is. We know he's a very solid role player. I just don't see the point in kind of having him take minutes from these guys. I mean, Nasir Little too. Maybe the ship sailed on Nasir. I don't know. We'll see. I honestly don't really know what to think about him as a prospect at this point. But I'd rather just give minutes to those guys than play Matisse Thybulle and Jeremy Grant and like try to be like somewhat decent at basketball. I don't really see the point in that. And a lot of people are saying, oh, well, we can trade Thybulle. This is a tradable contract now. And I definitely agree. I assume he'll be traded within the next 2 years before his contract is expired. Same with Grant. But I don't know. We'll see. I don't think it's the end of the world. An $11 million a year contract is not bad.
yeah.
I don't know. I think I would have let him walk, to be honest.
And like I was saying earlier before we started, we have to pay people. We have to hit that minimum salary point. So it's not that big of a deal. Same thing with the Jeremy Grant deal.
Yeah.
We might as well pay somebody. It's not the most horrific thing to be overpaying a guy like that.
No,
at this point in stage in a rebuild. But also Matisse, like you said, the tradable part of his contract, I think is very important to be said because he's going to be in high demand, already is in high demand. But if he has a decent next 2 years, I think we could get a decent haul for him. I think he could be a very valuable piece.
If we could net a first out of that, that'd be amazing.
Which I think is totally realistic. Not as of right now, but I think in 1 to 2 years, let's say he could get up to double digits in scoring. I think that could be a first round return for him. Yeah. Then at the same time, I don't know if you've watched a ton of Matisse interviews or like his blogs or anything like that, and like kind of who Matisse is. He's a really nice guy. A good guy. Yeah, you can tell he's great in the locker room. He's positive. He's good at influence. And he's just effort, defense, everything he can do to contribute to a team. I think that will rub off really well on Shaedon and Chris Murray and all the dudes around him and even Scoot, right? So I think that could be good for the locker room. They kind of need a guy like that.
That's a good point. I really see that a lot. Matisse's defense and his defensive intensity is super contagious, and I think that presence is good to have with guys like Rupert, Chris Murray, like you talked about. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So moving off of Blazers, for this episode, we're going to focus on a few teams in the NBA that we find the most interesting. It's not necessarily who we think the best teams are or what necessarily the best storylines are. We just are organizing it down to the teams that we find the most interesting between the two of us and would like to talk about. And then next week, we'll introduce 8 more teams. And then as we go down the line, we'll continue until we're done with a majority of the league. So obviously, we're going to start off with the 2 hottest topic teams coming out of the NBA playoffs, the Denver Nuggets and the Miami Heat. We're going to break that down. But then we're going to escalate down and talk about the Warriors, the Lakers, Milwaukee Bucks, and then the New Orleans Pelicans, and then finish off with some NFL stuff and kind of preview our NFL and football content that we'll be diving into a little deeper in the next few episodes. So we'll start out with the Nuggets. Kyle, I'd love to hear your thoughts on their championship run and what your interpretation is of them going forward and just overall perspective.
Yeah, I think the Nuggets kind of represent like a shift in terms of roster construction, optimal roster construction in today's NBA. And this is with a Dame trade on the horizon. This could be completely offset by that. But we are really no longer in the era of big threes anymore. We're in the era of get a stud top 10 player, MVP candidate, and surround him with 6 to 7 great role players. And while some of these teams have all-stars, some of them don't, those all-stars need to be guys who are kind of role player all-stars, if that makes sense. Guys like Aaron Gordon, who he's an all-star caliber player because he's so good at being a role player, if that makes sense. So Draymond Green is a player like that. And surrounding your superstar with a supporting cast of 6 to 7 guys like that is the new optimal way to build a roster, especially with the new CBA. And the Nuggets kind of just executed this to perfection. The Bucks did a similar thing a few years ago. Obviously, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton are all-star level players. And I would argue that the Raptors in 2019 did a similar thing, and even the Warriors in 2021 did a similar thing. Obviously, the Warriors are a dynasty, and that's not exactly a great comparison, but it's really Steph Curry and a great supporting cast of really, really good, 6 to 7 really, really good, borderline all-star type of players. And that's kind of how you build a roster in today's NBA. We're out of the Miami Heat big three. That's how you win ships, in my opinion. And I think that's how Denver kind of got it done this year. Obviously, they were 7 deep, had a great rotation, and they kind of just walked all over the competition in this year's playoffs. I don't see any reason why they'd slow down. Obviously, they lost Bruce Brown this offseason. That's going to hurt, but they have some guys who can fill those shoes. I'm sure you'll talk about that. And I see no reason why they wouldn't be the favorites again. I've said this before. I think they're going to win 3 championships in the next 5 years, unless something happens to Nikola Jokic, some injuries happen. I love the way this roster is constructed. It's the perfect system for a player like Nikola Jokic. He's set up to be a top 15 player of all time at this point. And I'm really excited to see if this blossoms into a dynasty or kind of fizzles out. So, yeah.
Yeah, they're really just in great position to, and like Kyle said, potentially win multiple championships 3 out of the next 5 years. I don't know if I'd go as far to say that at this point, but I definitely think multiple is not out of the question in any way, shape, or form. And I do think they should be the favorites next year and probably the favorites for the next 3 to 4 years. And partially because, so under contract right now, they have Jamal Murray and KCP over the next 2 upcoming seasons. And then they have Aaron Gordon and Christian Brown for the next 3 seasons, Michael Porter Jr. for the next 4, and then Nikola Jokic for the next 5. I think that's just, there's not many teams in the league that can say that or anything even close to that. And so that's a really dangerous formula for everybody else. And the fact that they're predicated on really good ball movement, that 2-man game between Jokic and Jamal Murray on the floor, that pick and roll, high pick and roll, and then the way they do all the DHO dribble handoffs and stuff like that is just absolutely unstoppable. And obviously the whole league is going to be trying to figure out how to stop that this offseason and scheme around how to get to the point where when we're in the playoffs, they have an answer. But they just do so many things well that they can counter off of it. And we got to see that in the playoffs to some degree with the Heat, who make the most adjustments out of any team in the league. And they still just couldn't figure anything out, even though they're a depleted team, a lot of injuries, and they're an 8 seed, lowest seed ever to make it to the finals outside of the 1999 New York Knicks. But still, I mean, I think we got to see a beautiful kind of introduction into the next phase of NBA basketball. I definitely think if I were to compare them to a dynasty of the past, and I'm not in no way, shape, or form calling them a dynasty yet, but I could see them being a dynasty that's similar and potentially parallel to that of each Spurs segment. I think they're more like the Spurs than any other dynasty. Obviously, just the fact that they have a center as their kind of star signature player, and then their role players fill everything out perfectly, and they pass the shit out of the ball, right? And so I think that's their most comparable dynasty team. And obviously, they have some things that they're going to need to fix, losing Bruce Brown to the Indiana Pacers 2 years for $45 million. And how do they fill that role? Because he was so pivotal throughout the playoffs. He's the highest bench scorer in the playoffs and made a ton of great plays down the stretch, big threes, huge defensive plays. He's their best on-ball defender. How are you going to fill that role? Well, I think the answer that some people aren't necessarily looking into, I don't know if a ton of people are even talking about the Nuggets at this point because from the outside looking in, they haven't made a crazy amount of changes and moves just because why would you if you're in this position that we just kind of set up and described. But I think Christian Brown, we got to see massive glimpses of him just making insane defensive plays and getting out in the passing lanes in transition. I think there was a game where he had 4 steals, game 2 or 3 or something like that, and just played his ass off. He's got a championship background with Kansas, and I think in high school he also won a state championship in the state of Kansas.
4 of them, I'm pretty sure.
4. Like,
I'm
Jesus,
pretty
he's
sure
like
he's won
Peyton
6
Pritchard.
championships in a row.
Yeah, that's absurd. So yeah. So I think he's the one who fills that role, and I think he has some scoring potential. And I mean, if you look at Bruce Brown when he came into the league and he was on the Nets, and he actually I think got drafted by the Pistons. It was with the Pistons for 1 or 2 years, but then it was on the Nets when he kind of became a rotational player. And he didn't have a 3-point shot, developed that, and became what he is now. He was always a good defensive player. But Christian Brown, once he gets a 3-point shot a little bit, the way Bruce Brown did, he's going to be really good. I think he's here to stay for the next 10, 15 years as a role player / starter type guy. And then outside of that, I think they had a pretty good draft filling that same role I just described, and then maybe another small deficit that they had, if you could find one, a weakness, if you will, in the Denver Nuggets that is kind of hard to see in the playoffs this past year because they were so dominant. But in the past, with some of their less successful playoff teams, they had Monte Morris, who could kind of run the point and be a ball handler when Jokic isn't in. And obviously that's Jamal Murray, and they'd stagger their minutes and whatnot throughout the playoffs. But I think there needs to be another guy that can play a full bench role and true point guard role when neither of them are on the floor. And I think they potentially could have found that with Julian Strawther with the 29th pick out of Gonzaga. And then some shooters that they also add. You can always add shooters in depth there, at least take some shots on that, as far as Jalen Pickett at 32 out of Penn State, and then Hunter Tyson out of Clemson at 37th overall, which I can't remember the year, but first Clemson player to get drafted since 2015, I think was the number.
Really?
Might need someone to verify that. But yeah, Clemson's like a weird one. You don't really hear about Clemson basketball players.
Yeah.
But so they basically drafted 2 really good shooters. Julian Strawther's a good shooter too, don't get me wrong, but he's ball handler as well, and he's 6'7" and a defender. I think he's the most versatile out of the 3. Pickett could be really good too. I don't know as much about Tyson, but I think they drafted for those specific roles in their system, and I think they know exactly what they're doing. So they're going to be in fine shape. I don't think anybody needs to worry about the Bruce Brown thing necessarily. I think it is definitely resolved to some degree, especially they re-signed re-signed Reggie Jackson and then signed Justin Holiday, who were 2 veterans and then 2 ball handlers, like I just talked about. And then they lost Thomas Bryant to the Heat, who they didn't really use at all, even though I think he has a lot of promise. And I can't wait to talk about him with the Heat, because I think he could be a massive difference maker that not a lot of people are talking about. And then Jeff Green lost him to the Houston Rockets, which he signed a pretty big contract for being like a older veteran that will definitely contribute to some degree. But I mean, the Rockets will be a fringe playoff team, if that. So yeah, that's kind of everything I have with the Nuggets. Do you have anything else to add, Kyle?
I don't know. I think we can just segue right into the team they played in the finals, and that's the Heat. So obviously the Heat are in probably the most interesting position in the NBA right now. They overachieved this playoffs. They were a very up and down team in the regular season. They were down with 6 minutes left in the play-in game to the Chicago Bulls, and then they find their way in the NBA Finals as an 8 seed, the second 8 seed in history to make the finals, where they obviously run into kind of just a better team in the Nuggets. And now they're looking to trade a lot of assets for Damian Lillard. So the Heat, really interesting. Obviously their core of Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, I guess you could throw like Caleb Martin in there at this point. He kind of seems to be a part of their future plans for the most part. Obviously super solid, both sides of the ball, defensive oriented. It's very team oriented. Eric Spoelstra is the best coach in the NBA, in my opinion. It's not particularly close. He's a Hall of Fame coach. He's a top 10 coach of all time. And it's difficult to kind of talk about this team right now because of the Dame trade on the horizon. I don't know who's going to be here next year, who's not going to be here. I do think they're going to end up trading for Damian Lillard. And when they do, regardless of what assets they give up in that, I think they'll be the favorites in the East. But until then, we're in kind of this weird spot with them. The window for Jimmy Butler is small. It's not the window of a Nikola Jokic or a Giannis. Jimmy is older than them, and I personally think he's going to deteriorate faster than a Jokic will. So you got to go for it while you're Miami, while you have Jimmy Butler, a guy who's a winner, a guy who desperately wants to win a championship in Miami. And I think a Damian Lillard trade is literally the perfect thing he could do. It solves a lot of their problems, and it instantly makes them a title favorite. Obviously, you're a huge fan of the Heat. What do you kind of think about the Heat's current position?
So at first glance, I'd say the biggest takeaway you can have from that season, from a team standpoint and not just a Jimmy Butler standpoint, going into next year is just an incredible amount of confidence that no matter what situation you get put in, no matter what you go through, you can come out the other side as a legitimate threat to still be a championship team. Like if they learned anything this past year, the one tough thing is a lot of their core is gone, with Vincent leaving to the Lakers and then Max Strus going to the Cavs, and then Oladipo, even though he didn't play in the playoffs, and then Cody Zeller. Still those core guys with Lowry and K-Love re-signing, and then Jimmy Butler and Bam. No matter what situation they find themselves in, they're going to have confidence that they can come out of the other side as the winner. Especially considering if they add Dame, like, you know where that will take them. Like the regular season won't even matter at this point. Coming away with that lesson, they just need to be there. Just give me a ticket. That's what they're going to come away with, is from outside of even basketball, outside of even acquisitions, roster, any of that. It's just mentally, I can come out the other side no matter what hand I've been given. That's terrifying, I think, for a lot of teams. And I think that's what made them so dangerous last year. And that was the intimidating factors, because they believed that at every point of the whole playoffs, and probably in their locker room in the regular seasons, even though we didn't see it. They're the lowest scoring team in the regular season. And then all of a sudden we get to the playoffs and they revert back to that high percentage efficient 3-point shooting team we've seen in the past that we saw when they were the number 1 seed in the East the year before. Right, they were the number 1 seed. I'm trying to verify. Yeah, they were. And they lost the Celtics at a close point 2 years ago when that happened. And then, so there's definitely holes to fill, and it'll be weird to see who they give up for Dame if that happens, or pretty much when that happens. But 2 of the acquisitions they made outside of re-signing Kevin Love, I think are very interesting and very fascinating. And I think actually 3 of the acquisitions, and I think very likely they keep all 3. You might have some contention, like we were just saying about the Jaquez part. But I think probably they keep Jaquez, and then they signed Thomas Bryant, as we just referred to, 2 years for $5.3 million, which if he plays at all like he did in that Lakers stretch when he was like playing his ass off, that's an insanely huge steal. And the Heat draw the best out of everyone. Yeah. They extract the best attributes of everyone and put them in just a phenomenal position to go succeed and be themselves. And that's what Spoelstra does. I was surprised you didn't give Spoelstra the Jesuit shout out, but
yeah,
I'm doing it for you.
Jesuit alum. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. Just like Kyle.
The best
and
of us.
And then the other one is Josh Richardson. I think that nobody's really talking about that, because he's been around the league, decent amount of teams over the past 2-3 years, and he was on the Spurs for a while, and that's when they were super bad, tanking. And I don't know if a lot of people have got to watch him play. Initially started his career for the Heat, but statistically he is very similar to Max Strus. He actually shoots a higher percent from 3. I'm almost 100% sure. And they got him for $5.9 million. And Strus went out and signed a $60 million deal, I believe is what it was. Yeah, 4 for $62 million. Like, that's value. That's a massive amount of value. So if they could replace Strus with Richardson, and Richardson's a better defender, for sure. Definitely a better defender. Yeah. Strus figured out his role, and he was not bad, and he did a lot. And he guarded bigger players pretty damn well for only being 6'5". But I think Thomas Bryant could be a huge impact. Josh Richardson could be a huge impact. And then Jaime Jaquez out of UCLA, like I was just saying, I mean, he's talked about Jimmy Butler being his favorite player in the pre draft process, and he plays a lot like him. If anything, he's more athletic than Jimmy Butler. Definitely can jump higher. He had a 42-inch vertical at the combine 2 years ago when he actually opted out and then went back to UCLA. Freak athlete. And like, you wouldn't think it watching him play, but he has some bounce and some verticality. But he's got a really good, just slow game, and plays at his own pace and plays in control. And the one knock on him was his 3-point shooting, but his stroke is good. He just doesn't necessarily shoot a ton of threes. It's kind of like Jimmy. Jimmy can shoot threes. He just doesn't until he gets to the playoffs. It's like a weird anomaly. But I actually think Jaquez is going to end up being a better 3-point shooter than a lot of people give him credit for. I think he's going to be a 5 attempts a game, probably shoot 35% from three, something along those lines. So I think he could be really good. And I think barring they get Damian Lillard, that's definitely my favorite storyline and will be definitely my favorite team because Portland's going to be on the back burner all season to some degree as a rebuilding team. Favorite team in the sense of actually has a shot at winning a championship. So I'm really excited for them. And I mean, I could talk about them for years upon years as far as their culture and Pat Riley and Spoelstra and all that stuff and the actual basketball aspect of it. But yeah, so that's it from the Heat standpoint. Next team we're going into, Golden State Warriors. They had kind of an interesting playoffs compared to the past and how they ran into some trouble with a young Sacramento team who's really interesting. Had their old coach, Mike Brown, fastest paced team in the league, and went to 7, ended up coming out on top, and then ran into a lot of trouble with the Lakers and their really good defense. So, and which is weird, is uncharacteristic of the Warriors dynasty. Weren't that good defensively. That was their one massive deficit was their defense, and then obviously their bench couldn't really figure it out. But what are some other things that you had takeaway wise from the Warriors watching them in the playoffs in the regular season?
The Warriors, I mean,
yeah,
I'm a pretty, I guess, a big Warriors fan. When the Blazers inevitably get eliminated, I've been rooting for the Warriors only when they don't have KD, obviously. But I root for them every season as soon as the Blazers are eliminated. I'm a big fan of their style of basketball. It's poetry in motion. Steph Curry's one of my favorite players of all time outside of Damian Lillard. I was just baffled watching them in the playoffs this year. All the pieces were there. They retained all of their pieces essentially from last year, which was a championship team, and it just wasn't clicking. The defense was not good at all anymore. There's a few reasons for that probably. You talk about just Draymond and Clay deteriorating. They're what were once absolutely amazing defenders. Clay especially. Draymond's still a very good defender. But Clay is not. He just isn't what he was, especially after the 2-leg injuries, and that's understandable. But Clay is a little bit of a shell of himself at this point. Still a great player, but not in his prime by any means, especially on the defensive end. And I think the biggest thing was just Wiggins not being there for the majority of the season. I mean, Wiggins, in my opinion, was the second best player on the Warriors championship team in 2021. And you could tell when he came back in the playoffs that there was just something missing. They just didn't have reps with each other. Wiggins himself wasn't very good. And another player who kind of falls into that camp is Gary Payton, I guess. He battled injury all year, kind of forced his way back to Golden State. But if he gets healthy this offseason, I think he could be a huge impact player for them on the defensive end. And that's what they need. They need that on-ball stopper off the bench that Gary Payton was 2 years ago for them. They need him to be that again. And also, one last player that is going to need to step up is Jonathan Kuminga. Obviously, still very young, still has a ton of upside. It was a very high pick, I believe the 7th overall pick. But he finds himself in a position on the Warriors where he needs to be a good role player right now. There's no more time. They need him to contribute to a championship level roster, and I'm interested to see if that could happen this year. Obviously, they made the Jordan Poole for Chris Paul swap. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
That kind of segues directly into what Draymond Green was talking about in Podcast P, Paul George's podcast. I think it was last week. And he was talking all about the CP3 edition, and it directly tied into Kuminga and then that second unit that I was just talking about that was a weak point for the Warriors. He was talking about how excited he is for Chris Paul to be able to mentor their young guys. And specifically Jonathan Kuminga, he thinks that he can unlock another gear in him and help work with him. And he directly referenced DeAndre Ayton with the Suns. And when Chris Paul arrived there, he kind of unlocked him and made him an all-star caliber player from a point where he didn't really look like he was going to contribute to winning a whole lot at that point in time in his career. And he believes that from being about as much of an insider as you can find in Draymond Green, that he's going to have a huge impact there. And then from a basketball fit standpoint, he made a really, really interesting point that I think people should pay attention to when the season starts, and then as we get into the playoffs next season, which is a long time down the road. But one of their biggest problems was when Draymond and then Steph couldn't be on the floor together. And obviously their chemistry is huge, and that's like a massive part of the Warriors dynasty, right? Is their two-man game off of dribble handoffs and their split action stuff, and then Draymond facilitating pick and pop stuff. That's when they're at their best offensively. And they weren't able to do that a whole lot because one of them would have to stagger into their bench unit so that they could have some form of scoring and organization, because their bench just couldn't really figure it out. And he was talking about, Draymond was on Paul George podcast, about how Chris Paul getting inserted into that second unit. Obviously, it's Chris Paul. He's the general. Like, he's about as good of a system setup point guard, and as far as making his teammates better, guy you can have with that second unit. And who knows if he starts or not, but just when you get down into the game, into rotations, and he's with that part of the team, he can unlock a lot of those dudes and help them out and create some organization and consistency and limit the turnovers too. They were one of the highest per game turnover teams in the playoffs. I think they were bottom 5. I believe they were bottom 5. And with their new additions too, from a draft standpoint, and those guys will obviously be coming off the bench probably with Brandon Pajemski, and then let's see, Trace Jackson Davis, and some of their other additions with, see, who were the other guys? They had Corey Joseph, and then Dario Saric, I think, was the other guy. So those would be the dudes in that second unit. Specifically with Brandon Pajemski, I wanted to talk about him a little bit. Out of Santa Clara, it's kind of crazy. We've had back-to-back first-round Santa Clara picks with Jalen Williams and him. Jalen Williams obviously panned out, and similar-sized players. They don't play quite the same game, but they're both pretty good defensively, good rebounders, and pretty versatile players for their position. 6'5", I think 195, and averaged, I think, 9 rebounds a game when he was at Santa Clara. Shot a really high percent from 3 at a high volume. Lefty, really, really smooth player, passed pretty well. I think he's going to be the next Warrior guard that kind of facilitates through that system, learns from Steph, and ends up being, I'm not saying he's necessarily going to be Poole, but he could be something very close to that, but with a totally different game than Poole. But I'm saying from a contribution standpoint. And then Trace Jackson Davis, who I wanted Portland to draft, or at least I wanted them to get him as an undrafted free agent, because I thought he was going to slide out because he was the second to last pick in the draft. But I think he could be a contributor on a team. He's not a shooter. He doesn't fit your natural modern age big role that we kind of talk about all the time. But he blocks the shit out of people. He averages like 2+ blocks a game at Indiana, 20+ points a game, rebounds the ball. Like, he's a really high energy guy. I just think it's almost disrespectful he's getting drafted that late. Who knows whether he's going to contribute the way I anticipate him to, but I think he's a real piece. And I think, the Warriors need another 5, right? They need a guy to like kind of help out Looney to some degree, and because they like to mix in Draymond in that small man role and that small man rotation, and then have some versatility there. So I could totally see him getting a decent amount of minutes along with Pajemski, obviously. And then we didn't say it, but it was inevitable that Draymond was going to get re-signed. We didn't really brush on that topic, but he re-signed for 4 years for $100 million, which I think is, what do you think? An overpay, or do you think it's about right? I think it's about right too. Yeah. You have to pay him.
You have to pay him for one. And
yeah,
Draymond is probably going to decline in the next 4 years if he hasn't already. By the end of this contract, this is his last big contract he's probably going to get. I think.
Sure. Yeah.
But 25 that's a good spot, especially with the CBA. I think that's like right on the money for Draymond. He could have went somewhere else and got overpaid. I would have been fine from a Blazers standpoint offering him $40 million a year. But for the Warriors, they keep a lot of flexibility by having Draymond locked up for 4 years on a pretty team-friendly deal. Mm-hmm. And I still think he's making about what he's worth towards the end of that. And one thing with their like contract situation is, I would just say it's interesting to think about if they're like a top 4 seed at the deadline. Are we potentially thinking about finally shipping off some of the young assets to make a push? I know that's been rumored the last like 3 seasons pretty much, that Moody or Kuminga, or I guess now their new guys or future picks, are going to be shipped off for one more like bench 3-and-D player. It'll be interesting to see if they do something this year, if they try to make one last push with Steph, Dre, and Clay, and with this core. So I think it's something interesting to watch for this year.
Something notable, I think, out of those two, I think Warriors fans might even be shocked by this, but I think out of Kuminga and Moody, I think if they were to stay with one of the two, I think it's most likely to be Moody, which sounds weird because obviously Kuminga is the way higher ceiling player. But in that same podcast I was talking about, I recommend someone to go watch that podcast. Shout out Podcast P, Paul George. But Draymond said some fascinating stuff if you want to hear the perspective of a championship player. But he said the two most professional players he's ever been around in his career, anybody, that's including Steph, whoever it is professional from the standpoint of gets in, does their job, never needs to be asked to do anything extra or anything of that nature, and never complains, whatever it is. He went and raved about Kevon Looney for a while, and then he said that the second one, most professional, was Moses Moody. And he talks all about him, raving about him. And if you notice, out of Kuminga and him in the playoffs last year, he would get in that Kings series and a little bit of that second round series, rebound the shit out of the ball, get a couple threes in, just play super hard. You could definitely tell he knew the system. And it was just a matter of like him being the fourth or fifth option that he didn't really get the scoring in that he probably has the potential of. But I could see him getting his minutes upped. And maybe, we were just talking about losing DiVincenzo to the Knicks and who's going to fill that role. Obviously, Podziemski could be that guy that kind of fills that. But I almost see Podziemski as, or maybe even vice versa, could be flip-flopped either direction here, as Podziemski filling the Poole role and then Moses Moody filling the DiVincenzo role, or vice versa. Because I could also see Moses Moody taking a leap, and then Podziemski's that back unit guy because obviously he's younger.
Yeah.
And considering what Draymond said about him being so professional, maybe this is the year he takes a leap because he gets the opportunity.
For sure.
And obviously, if you're a Warriors fan, you hope that person to take the leap is Kuminga, and not necessarily to the expense of Moses Moody, but just Kuminga's. He was a top 5 pick, right? And if you watch him play as a freak athlete, he has every tangible tool to be really good. Yeah. So, and then last thing, obviously, with the Warriors is Bob Myers, general manager, got replaced all the way. He was the general manager all the way through their dynasty and made a lot of great decisions, had a really good relationship with all their players. I didn't really read too much into the reasoning behind it, but it kind of just seemed like it was just his time. I think he's just retiring to some degree, or maybe he's just taking some type of break. Because it's obviously like a dense, very high impact job to be the leader of a dynasty for that long, and be making all those transactions. And now the new general manager is Mike Dunleavy Jr. First deal kind of was that Jordan Poole trade for Chris Paul, and I guess we'll get to see his performance the next few years. So
yeah. So
that's it from the Nuggets, Heat, and Warriors. And next we have the Los Angeles Lakers. So
sure.
Yeah,
so,
if you wanted to intro that a little bit, and then I can build off of it.
Lakers obviously going to be under the spotlight. Obviously, since their championship run, they make the Russ trade. Obviously, AD's been battling injuries. LeBron has been battling injuries as well as he kind of gets older. They make the Russ trade. That happens for a year and a half. They ship off Russ for Malik Beasley, D'Angelo Russell, and Jared Vanderbilt, bring in a bunch of guys, and they end up making that playoff push last year where they get to the conference finals, eventually lose to the Nuggets, obviously. And pretty much their main focus of this offseason was bring back their core, getting more consistency, more reps with the guys who made that run, and pretty much running it back in what I think is LeBron's last year on the team. And I think that's the right decision to go with. I don't think you need to get too crazy with it, bringing in a Kyrie Irving or a Trae Young or anything like that. I wouldn't have liked if they had done that. They have a great roster now. They brought back Rui, they brought back Austin Reeves, brought back D'Angelo Russell, brought in Jalen Hood-Schifino, brought in Gabe Vincent, retained, obviously, AD, LeBron, their core. And besides the Warriors, I think this is the second best team in the West. I think those are 2 and 3. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they play this year. If they stay healthy, sky's the limit for this team, I think. And got a lot of interesting players, a lot of players who can kind of break out into that next level. A lot of players in kind of the same tier right now, I would say. So it's going to be interesting who kind of steps up and is that consistent kind of third, fourth, fifth option for this team, because they have a lot of guys who could do it, and those guys kind of range in terms of skill set, in terms of age, in terms of a lot of things. It's kind of a ragtag group around LeBron and AD, I would say, and that worked pretty well in the playoffs last year. So I'm excited to see what it's like over the course of a whole season.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think time is the biggest deal with this roster, specifically with this roster being constructed so well together. I think it really complements itself really well. I think Rob Pelinka really thought deeply at the deadline when he made all these shifts and completely changed the direction of the team, and it definitely worked. And I think what they did in the playoffs, honestly, this past season as a 7th seed was really impressive. I definitely don't think it was a failure, contrary to the fact that they didn't win a championship. But I think the way they flipped things around and created a positive outlook for their franchise, I think was really good. Obviously, the clock's ticking with LeBron and AD. AD's pretty injury prone, and even though he's somewhat younger on star player scale, I think you need to add a few years because of his injury prone history. And then obviously LeBron is damn near 40 and still doing absurd shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as additions that they made to resolve maybe some of the little issues that they have, as far as 3-point shooting volume and efficiency, I think that's something they could get a little bit better at. Maybe having a stable point guard, which they kind of went in to fulfill with Jalen Hood-Schifino. And obviously Reeves plays a lot of that primary ball handler role, and then LeBron, obviously, and a lot of those other dudes. But I think Hood-Schifino could get in there and fill that a little bit. I think he's too good to not play, if that makes any sense, even though they did re-sign D'Angelo Russell as well. I think Hood-Schifino will be probably the main guard in that really packed third to fourth string point guard and shooting guard room. I mean, it's so weird because they also have Christie, who's playing his ass off in Summer League right now. They also signed Demoy Hodge from Missouri, who they're saying is like the KCP clone, and he was an undrafted guy, obviously. But and then Max Lewis out of Pepperdine, who's like basically a 3 with the 40th pick. And so they're just loaded with guards. Did lose Beasley, Lonnie Walker, Troy Brown, and Dennis Schroeder. And then also Gabe Vincent, like you also mentioned, like that's another guy that you have to throw in there. Like there's so many guards that have to be fed to some degree. So it's interesting how that works. But ultimately, I think Hood-Schifino is going to be good and get probably the most minutes out of those main rookies, except for the one that we just talked about earlier, off the screen, off air. Colin Castleton, so undrafted center out of Florida, initially was at Michigan and then transferred. He told multiple teams in the second round, multiple teams not to draft him in the second round because he wanted to go to the Lakers, felt like it was the right fit. Fascinating player. Go look at the Summer League box scores and watch a little bit of his highlights, because not a ton of people are familiar with his game that didn't watch a lot of SEC basketball. But damn, dude can pass. I think he's averaging 6+ assists right now in the Summer League. He's really good at protecting the paint, blocking shots, gets a decent amount of steals. He's really crafty. He's got a good back down game. Not an outside shooter, but he's a good free throw shooter. 70 plus, 75% plus free throw shooter. He's confident. You can tell he's got a chip on his shoulder, and there's something about him when I watch him that is just I don't want to get too far ahead of myself and say special, but I think he could be a rotational guy this year as an undrafted rookie. I think he could be like kind of what Reeves was. I think actually the Lakers scouting room is a lot better than people give them credit for. I think they have kind of a little bit of that Miami flair to them. I think they may, especially with the Demoy Hodge guy, like I was just talking about, the KCP type guy. Some of these undrafted guys can end up being good. They're definitely intriguing to me, especially when watching them in Summer League. I think their games translate. So
it's interesting because you kind of talked about that guard logjam, and obviously AD, LeBron, a lot of star power at the forwards position. Rui, one of their maybe even their third best player.
Love Rui.
And so where that kind of gap is at center, and that kind of leads into your point. I mean, that's really the only apparent position where someone kind of looking to break into this rotation could do it. Obviously, the Lakers have kind of consistently been looking for a center alongside AD. AD, obviously not a maybe you could say a natural five, but not his position that he kind of wants to play into. Not a position that at this point his game is even built for. So yeah, if the Lakers could have a consistent five next to AD, I mean, that's scary.
It's the most wide open role on that whole team, and it seems like what would be the reasoning to reject getting drafted by these second round teams? I mean, fit a lot of the time comes down to what's open on the roster, right? It's not necessarily about just coaching and just the culture and just the city. It's also about what is the opportunity at that point in time. Like if you're going to try to get a job somewhere, let's say we were trying to become like a scout for a team. Probably wouldn't want to go to a team that is the best scouts in the NBA. It'd be hard to crack into that room. You might want to go to the place where it's the best fit, where there's a role for you waiting. And I think that Castleton may have known that. And I think the Lakers might have known something that other people didn't. I'm telling you, his passing is something else. He's like very comfortable passer. It's fun to watch. Everybody's got to go watch a little bit of footage of him. And it just pisses me off because Portland didn't get him. Like I'd probably rather have, I like Repair, but I'd probably rather have him to fill the really necessary center hole that we're likely going to have when Nurkic leaves.
Yeah.
An interior defensive role and passer. Like I'm one who loves passing. Could have easily got him in the second round. Even from watching him play, he looks like he should have been a first round pick, and people had just made a mistake. I wouldn't be surprised if he's graded as a first round pick, maybe even a lottery pick in 2 years. People are going to look back, and we go back and look in the draft like, holy shit, like Jalen Brunson was drafted in the second round, like, and you go look at everybody who's drafted in front of him, it's like, what the hell were they thinking?
Yeah,
it's just like that. I think it's going to be to some degree like that, and I think it's interesting how like the last 4 drafts there's been a lot of those dudes in that second round and late first round that have slated in like that. Like Desmond Bane at 30 and like all these guys. I think it's interesting how there's more talent. The talent is deeper, I think, right now from a basketball standpoint, which is cool. I think that's really cool.
There's a guy kind of like that with our next team. Which are you done with Lakers or?
Yeah. Let's move into the Bucks.
Yeah. So with the Bucks, obviously a very straightforward offseason for them. They retained their core. There was a lot of rumors about Brook Lopez being offered a lot of money to go somewhere else. A little bit of Chris Middleton rumors after he had opted out of his player option. But they brought those 2 back. They have their starting lineup still intact. They lost Joe Ingles, Javon Carter, Wesley Matthews, Jay Crowder. Not the biggest losses, to be honest. None of them were really playing too big of minutes for them. Javon Carter was, I guess you could say, had some value. But they also added Malik Beasley, which me and Trent are both huge on. I think that's a great addition for them. That's exactly what they need. They need more shooters, more depth off the bench. And they drafted Andre Jackson Jr. So I'm a huge fan of both of these additions, and I think that can give a Milwaukee team that's kind of lacked depth the last couple of years a real push off the bench, and I think that's huge for them.
Yeah, I think any of you out there listening that are Blazer fans, you should know a lot about Malik Beasley. Anytime that dude caught a ball on the perimeter, lights out. At least against Portland. The dude is a flamethrower when he gets the opportunity and has minutes, and he's a pretty dang good defender. I think he could be. Don't be surprised if he's at 12 points per game, needle pusher, kind of like Bruce Brown was with the Nuggets this past year with Milwaukee. I think he could be kind of like a Bruce Brown this year. And I think him at a minimum, he's averaged double-digit points, like 6 straight seasons.
Yeah. I mean, he just didn't, for whatever reason, it just didn't click on the Lakers, and then his value just tanked.
Yeah, exactly, which is just crazy because it's just like all it was they got to the playoffs and they wanted to keep their rotation. It wasn't even necessarily a knock on him.
Yeah.
It's just you didn't want to mess that rotation up because it was working. And they're so deep at that point, which I think is the same thing is going to happen this year. I think one of those dudes we just said on the Lakers is going to, like whether it's Max Christie or who it is, they're not going to get minutes, and then their value is going to drop, and then they're going to go somewhere else, and they're going to be good.
Yeah.
Like, how many Lakers players have we seen that happen to? Like, so many.
Yeah. No.
Like, D'Angelo Russell, Brandon Ingram, Julius Randle. Like, the list goes on and on and on and on. It's crazy. But anyways,
Yeah.
With the Bucks, I like Andre Jackson Jr. too. I think he's an interesting guy out of UConn. And if you go look at his stats, nothing jumps off the page, and you're like, really, this guy is a second round pick. But if you watch him play, the things he does, it's goes beyond the stat sheet for sure. Yeah. From a defensive standpoint.
I mean, he was one of my favorite, honestly, players in this draft. I love those UConn boys. I mean, they obviously had a great team this year. I think they have a lot of NBA-ready players. But if you talk about, like, guys in the second round who have been, like, the mold to kind of break out and kind of add value to teams, it's guys who do something really well that if they could, let's say, develop a three-point jump shot, they're guaranteed to be role players in the league. And that's what I think Andre Jackson is. I think that's like the Bruce Brown archetype, like you talked about. Is Bruce Brown is like, he's a good defender. He's a good on-ball defender. He's a good play finisher. If he can shoot a decent percentage from three, he will have a good career in the NBA. And now he's getting paid $20+ million a year. And I think Andre Jackson is exactly like that. His playmaking is great. His defense is great. His rebounding is great. His size for his position is great. I don't think his form is that bad. If he could knock down a few threes, I think he's going to be in the league for a long time. And for the Bucks to get a player like him, I think it's incredible. I think that's a perfect fit, and I'm really excited for a retooled Milwaukee team. Hopefully they stay healthy, because that's really probably the biggest thing, to be honest, is just a healthy Giannis, a healthy Chris Middleton. If they have that, we haven't really seen them lose, to be honest. So obviously they made a switch up at coach. That's, I think, less consequential than people will think. It's still Giannis. You still know what the overall look and feel of this team is going to be. Obviously, maybe a different offensive scheme could be helpful. Budenholzer, I don't know. I don't know. It definitely got a little repetitive at times, and I'm not sure how big of a difference the switch is going to be, because, like I said, you still have Giannis, and this is still the exact same team. I don't know how much you want to reinvent the wheel, but we'll see if the scheme looks anything different on offense. I think on defense, it's a lot of drop with Brook Lopez. You're probably going to be running that a lot. You're going to have Giannis roaming. You're going to have Brook Lopez defending the rim. You're going to have Drew Holiday as the primary on-ball defender. And it doesn't matter what your scheme is. That's good enough to be a very good defense. That's some of the best defensive personnel in the league. It doesn't really matter what the X's and O's look like. That's going to be probably a top 5 defense. So I think the Bucks are right back in the thick of things. The time is now. I mean, Chris Middleton is aging faster than a lot of stars. Drew Holiday's talking about retiring after this contract. They don't really have young players. So while Giannis still has a lot of years left, the time is now if they want to win another championship. Obviously, they got one, and that kind of gets the monkey off their back. But you gotta make a push now while you still have this core and they're still good and everything's still intact.
Javon Carter loss concerns me. I think he played a really important role, just kind of an underrated role. Scored pretty damn efficiently, and he was a hound on defense. Really, really good defender that didn't really get nearly enough credit. And I think that's an important loss, and I don't know exactly how that'll be filled. Whether they'll just kind of replace that with scoring with Malik Beasley, or so Andre Jackson, he's more of a wing, right? He's obviously not like a ball handling guard, but he can pass the ball really well.
Yeah, for sure.
He was on triple double watch, kind of a little bit during March Madness, and an asset that players in the modern age have that isn't talked about enough is passing. And I've said it a lot in this podcast so far, but there are passers in the league now that aren't necessarily shooters, playmakers. Playmaking is fucking important. Mm-hmm. It just is. And it makes for better basketball, and it's a good culture addition. And I just think passing needs to be valued more. Look at the best player in the world right now. What's probably his most spectacular asset out of everything he does?
It's his playmaking, yeah.
It's his playmaking. Look at who a lot of people at our age regard as the greatest player of all time. What is potentially his greatest asset?
Playmaking.
Potentially. Yeah. One of the three. It's different. But LeBron, his playmaking is absurd. I'm just saying playmaking it's valued but not talked about enough, and not during the draft process isn't really looked at. Especially when you have size. If you can pass and have size and have defense, a shot comes later. You can't necessarily become it does happen a lot. People become better playmakers, but a lot of the time that's kind of an innate ability. So yeah, but the Bucks. I mean, pre playoffs, I was saying it to everybody. I thought there was no chance they didn't make the finals. I was so hell bent on the fact that I thought that they were definitely going to win a championship this year, or at least be there, and it just didn't shape up the way it did. But they were phenomenal in the regular season. They were a championship team in the regular season, and then it just fell off when they got there. But it's all there. Just the coaching change, I think, is going to make a big difference. And I like the fact that they kept the core and then just moved to Adrian Griffin, which is interesting. Which Adrian Griffin, for those of you that didn't know, it's AJ Griffin from the Hawks and Duke, his dad, which is pretty cool. His first head coaching job. So, I'm excited to see what they do. So, then moving on to one of the more fascinating teams. I feel like we both have a lot to say about them. And in the middle of the season, they had some really good glimpses, but then it just didn't really pan out as the season closed in, and they had some injuries. But the New Orleans Pelicans, and obviously they have Zion, Brandon Ingram, C.J. McCollum, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, who's really, really freaking good, and then you fill in all the rest of the guys there too. So So what are your thoughts on the Pelicans?
Yeah. Pelicans are interesting. I mean, they're kind of a different team compared to all the teams we talked about so far. All these teams have all of them have had a ton of success over the last 2 years, and the Pelicans haven't had the success yet. But we love their roster, and that's for a few reasons. I think we both think that their core, Zion, BI, even CJ a little bit, it has a ton of upside. I mean, it's all reliant on Zion being healthy. That's a big swing. That's a big what if. But if he is Giannis light. He is a top 10 player in the league, maybe. He definitely has the potential to be. And he's just so dominant, and you build around that. And I think the supporting cast is enough to get really far with a player like that. Their supporting cast is incredible. I mean, the last couple of years, they've drafted so well. I love all of their players they drafted. We're both huge fans of Trey Murphy. I think you compare him to Mikal Bridges in terms of a type of player who can have a huge breakout like that. And I don't know if I'd go that far, but I agree with the comparison. I think that's such a good player that I really wanted the Blazers to get when the rumors were heating up. But I mean, he does everything well. He shoots well. He has good size. He's long. He defends. He's a great defender.
He's a freak athlete.
And
nobody even talks about that.
Insane athlete.
He doesn't play like a freak athlete. His game is built around as if he wasn't an athlete. Yeah. But he just happens to be 40-plus inch vertical dunk contest.
Yeah, exactly.
Guy. He's a freak, dude. He's awesome, and he shoots at such a high clip.
He's great.
He just needs more volume. If you put a dude like him on the Rockets, maybe not the Rockets now, but a team like that, the Hornets.
It's the Mikal Bridges thing. It's you send him to a team where he can just hoop, and then
he totally is. He's just Mikal Bridges without playoff experience. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah,
that's what I think. But I mean, I'm also really high on Mikal Bridges, but
yeah. But I mean, even their other players. I mean, like we talked about Jordan Hawkins, one of my favorite players in the draft. I think he's absolute dead eye from three. His form is picture perfect. Off the catch, he has a lot of similar stuff off the dribble to great shooters in history like Rip Hamilton, Ray Allen, Klay Thompson. Even I would say that's the kind of bag I see him getting. And for a player like Jordan Hawkins to be bad and to be a bust, something would have to go terribly wrong, in my opinion. I just don't see a world where Jordan Hawkins isn't a role player for a lot of years in the NBA. And it's mainly just because of his three-point jumper. It's one of the best in this draft class. And if you can shoot at a high clip on a lot of attempts at a high efficiency, you will play your way onto the floor in today's NBA. Assuming he has nothing else, which he does. He has other stuff. But assuming he has nothing else, he's already a good role player for that. Love Jordan Hawkins. Love Trey Murphy. Herb Jones, we talked about a little bit. Great on-ball defender, one of the best in the league. Dyson Daniels is, I feel getting forgotten about. He was a top 10 pick last year. I feel nobody's really talking about him anymore. Another long, athletic, playmaking, on-ball defender. This supporting cast is great. If Zion is healthy, what's the ceiling of this team?
I think what we were just talking about. I mean, maybe not this year, but I think this is definitely the core of a championship team. This is the way they have filled everything out and the pieces they have and the age of the pieces they have and the coaching staff, everything about it. Sky's the limit for them. It's just literally Zion's health. And like, Trey Murphy could make a jump, and Zion might not even be as big of a factor as we're even giving him credit for. But quick, interesting point, just interjecting what you were just saying about Dyson Daniels. He's in the exact mold I was just talking about earlier, about defender, long, passer, not a shooter.
Yeah.
But I feel like is going to be probably successful still. I feel like he's that same mold. So it's just interesting that those players are starting to pop up a little bit more. As far as the Herb Jones little detail, probably my best and most interesting point I have on this whole podcast is the comparison of Herb Jones to Bruce Brown. And they both signed very different contracts, but they are insanely similar players. So Herb Jones signed 4 for $56 million, $14 million a year with the New Orleans Pelicans. And then Bruce Brown signed 2 for $45 million, $22.5 million a year for the Indiana Pacers. So just from a statistical comparison and a value standpoint, let's just compare the two players. So 10 points, 4 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and 1.6 steals for Herb Jones. Bruce Brown, 11.5 points, 4 rebounds, 3.4 assists, 1.6 steals. Okay. Herb Jones, 33.5% from 3, and then defensive rating per 100 possessions is 112. Bruce Brown, 35.8% from 3, and the defensive rating per 100 possessions is 114. Statistically identical. And even from a visual standpoint, I might even make a point that Herb Jones is a better defender. Just watching and seeing some of the dudes he defends.
Honestly. I think he just is. Like
he might be.
You brought up this comparison before we went live, and I thought about it when you brought up the stats, and I think Herb Jones is just flat out better than Bruce Brown. Honestly,
that's what I'm saying. And like maybe it's probably pretty close, but just the fact that it's that close, or you could make an argument this way or the other, and he's getting paid $8.5 million less dollars per year. Like that's a win for the Pelicans, and you still have everyone we just talked about, all the young assets, Trey Murphy, and my favorite asset on the whole on the Pelicans roster, including Zion. I actually like him more than Zion just because he's healthy. Has had some injury past, but Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram's 25.
Yeah.
25. You know how absurd that is? Like, I feel like we've been watching Brandon Ingram since I was in like middle school.
Yeah,
I feel like
he came into the league super young.
Maybe a little after that, but I'm just saying it's like crazy to think about that.
Yeah.
So their core is fascinating, and I just think it's only going to be becoming a more interesting storyline. And I mean, dude, God forbid when Zion figures it out and plays a 70-game season, watch out.
Yeah.
Watch out. But I mean, maybe that never happens, which would suck. But
I mean,
the basketball world deserves that.
Yeah, with this team, I mean, we love their pieces. We haven't seen it yet. So maybe this is the year, maybe not. We'll see. But I think we really like a lot of what New Orleans is doing, and definitely one of the more interesting teams in the league, in my opinion.
1,000%. Yep. So transitioning from that, we're going to do a little preview into some of our NFL content. We haven't talked any NFL yet, but Kyle and I are both going to give our 2 most interesting storylines. I'm going to kind of focus on 2 teams that I am mainly interested in their rosters going into next season. And then Kyle's going to talk about 2 more different pieces. But I'm going to explain one, and then Kyle will explain one, and we'll alternate. So, Kyle, if you want to start with your kind of your Bills piece,
I'll
start with that going. Sure. Both talk about it, yeah.
Yeah. So the first storyline I wanted to kind of briefly preview here, because we're obviously going to be getting into a lot more NFL content in August, and as the training camp and the preseason kind of heats up. I want to talk about the Bills, their championship window, and how it is closing, maybe not closing, but now is the time for the Bills. It's now or never. I was talking to my friends about this a lot the last couple of days, and they're talking about how disappointing the Bills have been in the playoffs the last couple of years, and it does seem like that, but if you look at it, it really hasn't been too many like catastrophic fails. The Bengals game is like the most recent example in our minds, obviously, and that's what a lot of this kind of storyline plays into. They were pretty much a Super Bowl favorite all throughout this regular season. But preseason, they were, I think, the favorite to win the Super Bowl because everybody kind of assumes, oh, it's not going to be the Chiefs again. Oh, the NFC's kind of weaker. Yeah, Bills. And they
got set up for failure, though. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it was they went way too far. Remember, there was like a preseason, like, where they chose their championship contending teams for like Fox or something like that. And it was like damn near like 6 out of the 8 analysts chose the Bills. So like,
I honestly completely agree. It's because of that. Like
they set them up for failure.
It's like the Chiefs aren't going to do it again. Like it's just I don't know. It's what team makes sense to be next up, and the Bills like fit that mold, so they had this hype, and now people are kind of talking about them drastically underperforming, and I do think they have underperformed, but it hasn't been as bad as the narrative would tell you. That being said, the AFC is an absolute bloodbath. And while at one point when Josh Allen broke out, it seemed like an absolute certainty that he was going to win one or multiple MVPs and one or multiple rings with the Bills, that's not a guarantee anymore. If you look as good as the Bills are, I mean, we don't even have to talk about that because that honestly doesn't really play into the storyline. We know how good the Bills are. We know that Josh Allen is a top 3 quarterback in the NFL, top 5. We know that Josh Allen to Stephon Diggs is an electric combination and those dynamic quarterback to wide receiver combinations are what kind of runs the NFL nowadays. Their offense is incredible. I think you can see a few different players besides Diggs and Allen kind of break out on their offense this year, but maybe not. Maybe it's kind of what it's been and just a pretty mediocre supporting cast of weapons who get the job done and then that combination. But they have the defense they have a great defense, a defense that can compete, a defense that can win them games. And they have the offensive firepower to compete with every single team in the NFL, including Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. That being said, a lot of teams kind of have that now. A lot of teams in the AFC kind of have that now. A lot of teams in the Bills division have that now. So the expectations and the pressure is not higher for any other team in the NFL this year, I don't think. Even a team like the Jets. I think this is do or die for the Bills. And honestly, if I was to make a prediction, I don't know if it's going to happen, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, anytime it's usually easier to peel off with the field, which
of course
probably is what I would choose too. But at the same time, I don't remember hearing a ton of narrative where people, and I'm not saying this excuse is valid, but it definitely needed to be talked about. It's an asterisk in their championship run last year is Von Miller getting hurt.
Yeah. No, 100%.
That was the big change they made in the offseason. That was supposed to be the one to get them over the hump. And he was going to be the one who to finally get them out of the AFC, basically. He was the final puzzle piece, and he didn't even play. So, like, I think that needs to be said a little bit. I think if they have Von Miller, I think they have a much better shot. But relying on a dude that at that point in his career is kind of difficult with that defense. I think maybe the defense needs, I don't know. I mean, they're so talented. Their defense is so talented. But when it comes to crunch time and from a pressure standpoint, like, who's going to stand up and make a play like that? Like the way the Chiefs have Chris Jones and just everyone kind of has that X factor player. But I mean, there's still no excuse. I mean, the Bengals got to the Super Bowl and they didn't have that guy, like that X Factor Hall of Fame edge rusher. I mean, they had a lot of good players, but I'm just saying, like, I'm not necessarily giving them a full on excuse, but Von Miller is definitely a huge factor in that standpoint. But I mean, going back into the AFC East, like, very fascinating storyline. Like, I think the Giants are going to be good again. I think they're going to be about as good as they were last year. I think that there's some people that are like in both ends of the spectrum. And obviously we have friends who are Giants fans. Shout out Mahmoud Mustafa when he watches this. And they think that they're going to do an 11, 12 win team, which I probably don't think. I think probably like 9 to 10 wins. Pretty realistic. Maybe even a little less than that. I mean, it sounds like, maybe
I'm very low on the Giants. But
you think 8, 9? What's your quick prediction on the Giants record-wise? 7 and 10?
Yeah, let's say that. Let's say
7 and 10. That's not outrageous.
That sounds right.
I'm gonna say 8 and 9, maybe 9 and 8. I wouldn't be that. I mean, their division is so good, but I'm gonna stick at 8 and 9. I think that's
lightning in a bottle year. I don't really believe in them. I think the Steelers were better than them last
year. But
year.
I believe in their coaching staff, though. I believe in Dable,
sure,
and
I agree.
And so
I have one of the worst offenses in the NFL.
But think about what their coaching staff put together with one of the worst offenses in the NFL last season.
Lightning in a bottle.
Like I'm just saying, the more you give them, I think in the NFL, coaching staffs mean so goddamn much. It like makes the difference between so much, and like transitioning from much talking about the NBA where it's not nearly the same impact. There's still a huge role to be played by coaches. Don't get me wrong, but in the NFL, like you can turn a bad defensive roster into a legit weapon. So, and then the Jets storyline's super interesting. We'll definitely get way more into that. It's almost too much to cover.
No, it is. It completely is, honestly.
Yeah. I think the Patriots are going to be the worst team in the division by a lot, though.
Yeah, I agree. Do you want to kind of go with one of your teams? Because, I mean, that's kind of all we need to say about that. It's very high-pressure situation for the Bills, and we know what they are for the most part. It just, is it going to happen or not? And as the years keep ticking by, the pressure keeps increasing, and we're kind of at a boiling point with that right now, I think, is to kind of sum up my thoughts on that narrative and that storyline. But do you want to go into one of your teams?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about two teams that I'm definitely rooting for next season, and I love their storylines. And like I stated in the last podcast, I'm a homeless NFL fan, but these will be definitely two teams that I'll be riding with to some degree. And it's weird because I've never really rooted for this team, even though they're Pacific Northwest team, and a lot of people around us are huge fans of them. But the Seattle Seahawks, I definitely think their storyline is fascinating. The fact that they flipped Russell Wilson and then still were a playoff team, and their draft was just so beautiful. And like, I don't even think on draft day, I don't think a single person had any idea what they had just done. And I'm kind of interested to see which team will kind of fit that mold this year that just like had a hell of a draft and then nobody knew until a few games into the season. But and I think they had a really, really good draft again this year. So they added Devin Witherspoon from Illinois at the 5th pick, Jackson Smith-Njigba from Ohio State at the 20th pick, who, oh my God, getting him at 20 is such a steal. It's not even funny.
Yeah.
You could tell, like, obviously they have Lockett and they have DK. There's no way their talent evaluation team was going to turn away from him. Because literally from like pick 10 until pick 20, when we were watching it, I really remember watching it in Corvallis. Every pick, I'm like, if this isn't Jackson Smith-Njigba, I'm going to be pissed. And then 10 picks go on, and then somehow they ended up with him. I think he's nasty. He can do everything you need. Inside routes, outside routes. He's just phenomenal route runner, really good hands, good body control. Yeah. I mean, Ohio State receivers have a really good track record, especially in the last 5 years, and I think he's going to be no exception, if that an exception on the positive end. And then another notable player, Derek Hall, who's an edge out of Auburn, 37th pick, and then Zach Charbonnet from UCLA, who's going to add depth to Kenneth Walker, who I can talk about Kenneth Walker for hours. I love the way he runs. I had a lot of fun watching him last year, coming off an injury. But their offense is just every phase really, really good. Really good 2 tackles with Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas. And then their defense is obviously stacked. Getting Jamal Adams back, returning Bobby Wagner, Quandre Diggs, Tariq Woolen, who I don't care who you are, should have been in the conversation for Rookie of the Year, Defensive Rookie of the Year. Obviously, I have no problem with Sauce winning it, but the lack of respect for Tariq Woolen to even be in the conversation, I think, was ridiculous. Definitely. Like, dude is 6'4", 6'5", runs a 4.2 40, and is an absolute monster playmaker, just 2 steps ahead of everybody on the field. He's going to be a perennial All-Pro.
Yeah,
would not be surprised.
Is insane. I mean,
it's absurd, dude.
It's almost cliche to say, but they're building the Legion of Boom Part 2.
Yeah,
they really are. I mean, their secondary,
the Legion of Speed,
the strength of their team. The front 7 is probably the weak point of this team, if you were to find one. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so like that's where Derek Hall kind of comes in. The dude they drafted out of Auburn. He's kind of an edge guy. He got graded as top 5 in overall athleticism at the combine. I think he ran a 4.55 40. Don't hold me to that. I think it was roughly that, super fast. So he's going to add a little bit to their defensive interior and then their edge rushing. But I think then they had a few other acquisitions as well. I can't remember exactly who they were, but I think their defensive line will be a little bit better. I don't think they need like a massive overhaul. I think they just need help in the interior with their linebacking core a little bit. I think Jamal Adams will provide that because obviously he's like safety / linebacker / everything. Like he's just kind of like a strange player, right? He's not really a DB in any really sense except for where he lines up. So yeah, I think they'll be fine there just because of everything else that is kind of shaped up. They were 9-8 last year, lost the wild card to the Niners, 41-23. But I think they could really do some damage this year. There was a clip on Twitter that I saw of Louis Riddick, who's an NFL analyst, and he was kind of talking about the stuff I was just talking about, and he was saying how he thinks the Seahawks could potentially win their division in the NFC West, which is kind of a crazy thing to say with the Niners and all the talent they have. But don't be insanely surprised if this is a 11-12 win team.
100%.
Because at the forefront of all this, who I haven't even said his name yet, but one of my 4 favorite players in the entire NFL, Geno Smith. I am such a fan of him. I love his story. I love the way he plays. I think his arm talent is great. I think he's had the highest completion percentage in the NFL this past season. I think it was 69.8% or something roughly like that. And he's just a winner. And I think he's here to stay for the next 4 years, 3-4 years. And they re-signed him to a pretty good contract. And the fact that they came off of Russell Wilson and then had him in the back pocket for however many years he was their backup, and then now they're in this position, kind of one of the craziest 180s I've ever seen from a team.
You really
so
don't
even from that standpoint,
you really don't see stories like the Geno Smith story like play out. It's so rare that something like this happens, and that's why it's so cool, honestly. And I think that's a really like cool player to have in your like top 5 favorite players. I think that's awesome. Obviously Geno Smith, one of the most accurate QBs in the league last year, and adds Jackson Smith and Jigba, so that's going to be. I mean, I think this is the at worst 3rd best team in the NFC. I think they're very much Super Bowl contenders. Love the Seahawks.
Yeah, and one last thing I want to say about the Geno point that you just said is, and I definitely think we'll have a podcast maybe even just dedicated to this topic, and I'll have to add it to our topic list. But I had like a massive long conversation about this with all my roommates earlier this year. But just the concept of a bust and the way we term people a bust, and the way their careers pan out, especially in the NFL where opportunity is so important, and especially at quarterback where it's like we're talking about fit and like luck and like kind of like the Castleton thing we were just talking about with the Lakers, and how you just go to a team with that position open for you. Like that is so damn important. And so like Geno Smith, until 365 days ago or whatever it was, when he proved himself, we would have termed him a bust his career.
100%.
Right? And that's why I don't like that term very much. And I think we need to have a more in-depth conversation about it. But I think it's just a crazy statement in a lot of ways. And I don't know. That's just a small little tangent I have. That'll foresee some future discussions. So what's your next big storyline?
Yeah, my next big storyline, obviously, this is very close. My favorite team, so I've been following it very closely. It's the AFC North, in my opinion, the best division in football. Just the kind of bloodbath that's the AFC North. The AFC as a whole, but specifically the North, the best division in the AFC, and just how wide open it is and how just loaded it is, honestly. I mean, I think it's safe to assume that the Bengals will win the division again. I think you kind of have to say that. There's no reason why that wouldn't be the case. I mean, they've dominated for the last 2 years with a Super Bowl appearance, obviously, a loss in the AFC Championship in their other season. And they've gotten better. But if you look at what the Ravens and the Steelers, specifically the Browns as well, but I very much think the Browns are the 4th best team in the North. Great. They have a lot of good going on there, though. I think they have a lot of upside, especially Deshaun Watson. I mean, we'll see with that. I think he obviously we know how good Deshaun Watson is. It just, we haven't seen it in a long time. So who knows? But I think they kind of go as far as Deshaun takes them. They have a great supporting cast. They have a great defense. They have a great offense at this point, honestly. A lot of pretty underrated moves on the Browns side. Elijah Moore being a big one that I really like. I think he could have a fantastic season if Deshaun kind of gets it together. But I think the Browns are very much the 4th best team. I think the Bengals, it's safe to say, are the best team. And if you look at how much the Steelers and the Ravens improved, especially considering that they were borderline playoff teams or kind of on that playoff bubble last year. Steelers obviously had 9 wins. Ravens had 10, I believe. And if you just look at what they did, we could start with the Ravens. I think Lamar Jackson might win MVP again this year. I mean, they've overhauled their offense. Greg Roman's out. They add Zay Flowers. They add Odell Beckham Jr. They don't want Lamar they want Lamar to play a healthy season. Obviously, that's the key to success with this team. And I don't know. Obviously, that's a gut feeling, but I think it could happen this year. And I think Lamar is going to have a fantastic season this year. Always what I say as a Steelers fan is in the North, you're gonna be playing some games against Huntley. You're gonna get at least one, and the Steelers and the Ravens split every year. I think it's probably still true because the Steelers are good, but this Ravens team is a Super Bowl contender in my opinion. And if you just look top to bottom, the Ravens, the Steelers, the Bengals too at this point, they draft so well every year. These are well-run organizations. These are well-coached organizations. And I feel like the Bengals should definitely be afraid of the Ravens and the Steelers kind of coming for the top. If you get into the Steelers, I mean, Mike Tomlin is a legendary coach. He's a Hall of Fame coach. And he's never had a losing season. And even last year, a rebuilding year, I would say, a rookie quarterback who didn't even play all of the games. He wills this team and just, along with TJ Watt and vet leaders of this team, who build off the classic Steelers culture, kind of similar to that Heat culture we talked about with basketball. It's very similar. The Steelers find a way to win games. They're gritty. They're in your face. It's all the cliches about Steelers football. They're tough-nosed. They run the ball down your throat. They win games on the defense. And they did again last year in a rebuilding year where the roster wasn't that great. They won 9 games. And then we had a top 3 draft in the NFL, in my opinion. I mean, we had Joey Porter Jr. at pick 32. It's exactly what we need. We need a corner who could play man coverage, a physical corner. And obviously, with the legacy, that's a perfect fit. That's my favorite pick of our draft. Obviously, I think from top to bottom, addressed a lot of holes we had, but I'm really excited for the Steelers this year. Took some swings in the draft and kind of played it safe. I don't need to get into all of their picks, but I think the Steelers, the Ravens, and the Bengals are all playoff teams, and I think the Browns are. I project them like 8 wins. I don't know. I think this division is anyone's for the taking. I think the Bengals are probably the favorite, but there's going to be some quality coming out of the AFC North this year, and it wouldn't surprise me if three of their teams got in. So yeah.
What about 3 of the teams out of the AFC East?
I mean, honestly, it wouldn't surprise me either. The AFC South is the weakest. But and I think the AFC North is the strongest. But man, the AFC, just the quarterbacks. Just start with the quarterbacks. I mean, look how many elite quarterbacks with Aaron Rodgers now in the AFC. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. I mean, that's all the players. Trevor Lawrence, I didn't even talk about. And then, I mean, anybody who comes in, I mean, people who are unproven who could make a leap into there. There's a lot of kind of conversation about Kenny Pickett. It's a pretty polarizing player, I would say. I think Kenny Pickett's a winner. We're clearly building around him. We clearly don't have any kind of reservations about him as a player. It's not we are still seeing what we have with Kenny. I think we know what we have with Kenny. I think he's obviously not Patrick Mahomes. He's not Josh Allen, but he's a guy who I think will take a good roster and go head-to-head with those guys. And that's kind of what you need to do if you don't have a generational prospect like a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen. You need to kind of do kind of a Seahawks type of model and build the roster out and get a quarterback who is good enough to go at those guys head-to-head, win games, be a competitor, and have your advantage come at all the other positions. And I think the Steelers are kind of building a roster that's able to do that. So kind of got sidetracked with this one into a little bit of a Steelers fanboy rant, but I mean, I love the Bengals and the Ravens as well. So I think this division is so stacked this year, and we'll see who comes out on top.
Yep. Very interesting stuff. Yeah. I mean, my initial thought when you said AFC North, I was just thinking AFC East immediately. We kind of, when we talked about that in your previous take, we didn't really touch on the Dolphins, who I'm also pretty high on. But yeah, I think it's definitely those two. You can make arguments for each division. I mean, it just comes down to that bottom team, who's better, the Patriots or the Browns, which very likely the Browns. But also, let's be real. We can see the Patriots being an 8-9 win team very easily. I mean, just in some weird world,
100%.
Bill makes that happen.
100%.
So last point I have, and I'll keep it a little bit more brief than I did the Seahawks one, but because it's getting covered by a lot of like mainstream NFL networks and stuff like that. But the Detroit Lions, I think a lot of people are high on them. They got the opening game against the Chiefs this season. They're really hard not to root for. They've never won a championship. They've never really been a powerhouse organization, and I think we're starting to see that. Whether that's this year or not, I mean, that remains to be seen. But I think they did a lot of stuff that I think is interesting. I think they made a lot of championship moves, even though initially looking at their draft, there's a lot of picks that I didn't think made a ton of sense where they were picked, but I do think they were good picks, if that makes any sense. It's just, I think you could get the same value at a different spot and maybe return a little bit, which is what my initial thought was when I was watching the draft. But now having some time to reflect on it, I think they definitely did some interesting stuff. So like with Jahmyr Gibbs, drafting him at 12. I don't know if you heard me talk about him in the past when we were talking like pre-draft stuff, like early in the year when we were back towards the draft, a few months ago. But I always was super high on him since the beginning and middle of last season, with him coming out of Georgia Tech and transferring to Bama. He's got really good balance, and I think he's really versatile, and I think he could definitely be that mold that comes in and is also a pass catcher. Really versatile guy, good route runner. Reminds me of Alvin Kamara in a lot of ways. Going back to his balance, I think he just makes everything look smooth, and he's way stronger than it appears. And I think he's going to be a very successful back, even if he may have been able, the Lions may have been able to get him at 20 or 25, which I ultimately think they probably could have. But honestly, I wasn't in the war room. I didn't hear about what other teams were doing. I didn't get to hear like potential bluffs. Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So there's nothing wrong with someone taking the player that they think, and if he pans out. But like, I don't know. I'm usually not the biggest fan of taking a running back in the top 15, but regardless of that, I think he could definitely pan out to be a really good player, and it won't end up mattering. And then they took Jack Campbell out of Iowa at 18, and then Sam Laporta also out of Iowa at 34. Can't say I watched a ton of Iowa football, but in watching both of their tapes, I think they could each be immediate contributors. And I think Sam Laporta could be a lot better than people think. If you go read reports out of their camp, there's statements on in the news media and stuff like that out of the Lions camp. If you go read like NFL reports and stuff, that Laporta is like one of the more talented dudes in their like OTAs and stuff like that. Like they're saying like he's like a freak, really good pass catcher, and just like a dude that like not a lot of people are going to be thinking about, but maybe like almost like a Kittle type of player who also came out of Iowa at the same position at tight end, that nobody talked about. And all of a sudden they see and they're like, wow, like I can't believe we missed this guy. And then obviously they got Goff, Amon-Ra, who I love. Their line is really promising with Frank Ragnow, and then Penei Sewell, and then second-year player coming in, Kerry Joseph, also out of Illinois, like Witherspoon on the Seahawks, and then obviously Aiden Hutchinson with the second pick last year, and he's got a lot of promise. So I think the defense is the most important part of their roster, and I think the biggest acquisition they made, not even close, and it's probably my favorite acquisition in the NFL as far as fit, and that's CJ Gardner-Johnson joining their defense and being a leader on their team. I loved watching him when he was on not just the Eagles last year, but when he was on the Saints. I think he's got a massive chip on his shoulder, and I think he plays winning football. And I love hard-hitting safety / like kind of utility defensive back players that are just have a chip on their shoulder. I just love players like that, and I think every team to some degree needs a guy like that. And I think he could definitely, like, he's the type of guy you add and you go from, I can't remember what the Lions were defensively last year, but you could potentially go from 24th to 17th, one addition. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then you have a bunch of rookies escalate a little bit and then just gain more time together. And all of a sudden you're a top 15, top 10 defense. Like, who knows where they'll be at. But that's the X factor, is their defense. That's because their offense is going to be good regardless. Also added Marvin Williams, who's been on the team in the past. Also a leader. Always has just like a weird game in the middle of the season where he has 4 touchdowns. Like, he always has that weird fantasy game in the middle of the season. But I love this team. I think it's really hard not to root for them. But also at the same time, I think it's overblown a little bit. I think there's a lot of people like saying, oh, they're going to be a 12-win team. Oh, they're going to be a 13-win team, and just kind of like giving them too much of a high grade. But I think they'll be probably a wild card playoff team, like very likely.
The division,
but I think they could win the division. That's what I was kind of segueing into. Interesting division. I think the Bears could potentially make a leap. I also think the Packers, nobody's talking about them and Jordan Love. And I could see Jordan Love having a really, really good season. At the same time, I could also see them being a 6-win team, 7-win team, who knows. But I would not be terribly surprised if Jordan Love was good and they were a potential playoff team. And then obviously the Vikings. And they didn't really address a ton of defensive holes, even though that was one of their main issues. And then they added Addison, that second receiver. They always have that 2-receiver mold historically since like the early 2000s, and Randy Moss and Chris Carter. It's kind of funny how that, and then Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. It's just funny how they keep that same mold formula. But if I could choose a team to win the division, like that I want,
money. If you had to throw $100 on a team, you have to choose a team.
Oh, if I had to bet on it, I'd probably choose the Lions. But if I could actually choose, I might say the Vikings, just because the Vikings are the most loyal fans in all of football, and they've never been rewarded, and they're always diehard fans. And I was at a wedding last night, and I was literally just talking about this. I've never met a Vikings fan that isn't a diehard Vikings fan. Never. Yeah. I've never met a Vikings fan that doesn't watch training camp, know every player they drafted. Like, I've never met a Vikings fan like that. Only diehard Viking fans. So, like, I am always pulling for them, and I would love to see them be successful, even though I don't. I think the Lions will probably. I think it's a more complete roster. And maybe the Vikings got some like weird defensive players that we're not thinking of, and that puts them over the edge, because I don't think they need that good of a defense. They just need a top 17 defense. Yeah, like they need an adequate defense, right? Top 15. So, but yeah, a lot of interesting stuff. We definitely have a lot of other NFL storylines we can.
Yeah, just even talking about for like 20 minutes or hour we did. It's so much fun. I'm so excited.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that'll be a lot of fun to get into. I can't wait for it, dude.
Yeah, for real.
Yes. All right, so previewing next week's episode, we're going to be talking about 8 more NBA teams, and those teams will be the Grizzlies, the Cavs, the Suns, the Kings, the Celtics, the Clippers, Thunder, and the Spurs. Finally going to start talking about Victor Wembanyama, which I'm sure a lot of people are waiting for. So, and then we'll be diving into some more in-depth NFL stuff as well, and then anything else that comes along that we can think of throughout the week. So thank you guys so much for listening. It's been a really fun process over the last 2 weeks, and we just can't wait to keep getting better. So,
yeah. Thanks everyone for listening. We're hoping that we're improving every single week that we do this. Just getting more natural, having these conversations flow in a more natural sense, and just being more comfortable, kind of giving takes and kind of bouncing off each other. It takes time, but we're hoping that we get better every single week. And we think that this week was a step up from last week, and we hope that next week follows the same trajectory. So yeah, thanks you guys for watching. Next week we're getting into that content Trent said. We're excited for it. We're excited to get into some more NFL content as the summer keeps progressing. And yeah, that's all I got.
And don't forget to subscribe. All right, thank you.